It's Wednesday, February 4th, 2015, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are Missouri School of Journalism colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, why President Obama is telling Senate Democrats to avoid reading the Huffington Post. A Newsweek cover story looks at the sometimes hostile environments women working in tech find themselves in. The cover story, which was kind of designed to be evocative, is it just piling on the sexism? And we've got some updates on topics we've talked about recently. They've got some interesting developments. One of the Al Jazeera journalists jailed in Egypt is now free. More on Indiana's Just In news agency, and that reality show Breaking Greenville is now on the air. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before the half hour's up, but let's start with the measles outbreak and the debate over childhood vaccinations. More than 100 people contracted the illness, many of them after visits to Disneyland. Anyone exposed who hasn't been vaccinated is almost guaranteed to contract it. Some parents, though, choose not to vaccinate their children, thinking that there's a connection between childhood vaccines and autism. Scientific research has proven that there's no link. Still, this week, that debate became political. Here's Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, a medical doctor, on CNBC, talking about why he understands parents choosing not to vaccinate.
I've heard of many tragic cases of walking, talking, normal children who wound up with profound mental disorders after vaccines. I'm not arguing vaccines are a bad idea. I think they're a good thing. But I think the parents should have some input. The state doesn't own your children. Parents own the children, and it is an issue of freedom.
That's an interesting choice of words there. Parents own the children. That said, Paul's statement about vaccinations leading to disorders caught the ear of many in the media, including CNN's medical editor Sanjay Gupta, himself a neurologist.
This is the sort of pandering that can be dangerous because, Rand Paul's a doctor. I'm sure he looks at studies. He knows a scientific method. He says he knows of many children who have wound up with mental disorders after vaccines. I don't know where he's getting that data from. And one of the old adages, Mick, in science is that correlation does not equal causation. There may be kids who have had mental disorders that have also received vaccines around that time in life. But just because those two things happen around the same time do not make one causing the other. So, again, I don't know why he's saying this. The numbers don't bear that out. The science doesn't bear that out. I'd be curious what drove those comments.
That was one of many segments that Gupta did on CNN, on a mission clearly to discredit Rand Paul's statements during the last 48 hours or so, using scientific data specifically to do that. How are we seeing others react to those statements as well?
The problem for me is that it's sort of what you would expect in terms of this becoming a political debate and being framed in the 2016 presidential election. Rand Paul, at the very least, and I do not agree with what he said, but Rand Paul, at the very least, has the libertarian credentials that maybe he actually does believe what he's saying. But you have Chris Christie, for example, who is jumping in there and trying to have it both ways because he's running for president as well. I think there are some politicians who actually got it right on both sides. I mean, Hillary Clinton, had a nice little tweet. The science is clear. The earth is round. The sky is blue and vaccines work. That's great. And House Speaker John Boehner was saying, I don't know that we need another law, but everybody should have their kids vaccinated. There is some sanity out there. It's just too bad it has to be framed in this sort of straight political presidential context.
I think part of the issue here, it sort of goes back to when we talk about climate change. I mean, these instances become politicized because one group or another is debating science, even though the information that's out there, the clear facts out there speak in terms of this is actually happening. Vaccines work. Climate change is happening, but it becomes politicized because there's a vocal group out there who wants to basically say, well, this isn't really proven. This is happening and not this is happening. And it makes for a very difficult time for people to really understand what's going on. And I think when it comes to vaccine, the science is out there. You need to get your children vaccinated. If not, it becomes a national health issue.
It is disturbing that we're seeing this growth in the sort of anti-science attitudes out there, and they seem to be tied into the sort of anti-institutional bias that people have now. They're afraid of institutions. They don't believe institutions. They don't believe science, and that's really scary. But I have to tell you, I think that media have some blame that they should accept for this as well. There was a piece that a reporter in Forbes has got out today that was looking at one study that showed that over the past 15 years, the major TV networks just by themselves have done something like 170 stories about the alleged link between vaccines and autism. And so we're giving a platform to people like Jenny McCarthy and the doctor who wrote the discredited report that was in the Lancet several years ago. We're giving them a forum to scare people or to give them something to hang their hat on when they're afraid of getting their kids vaccinated.
And I also think that there's some pandering going on by politicians, not necessarily all of those who are running for president, but you're talking about politicians who are in some of these red states who use these sort of studies to use against their opponents to discredit them in one way or another, and we in the media sort of jump into that because we give them a platform on which to say these things.
So Sanjay Gupta is clearly coming out against it, providing that scientific data. Why aren't we seeing more news outlets doing that as opposed to giving the platform for some of these
I think
anti-vaxxers or these people who aren't buying into the science and giving them a place to talk about that?
I think, Amy, in this most recent situation following on the Disneyland outbreak, that you are seeing more news organizations providing the science and basically trying to say this is the consensus. There isn't any really scientific debate about this. The problem is that this stuff is cumulative, and it isn't just the national media either. I should say, just full disclosure, the journalism school had some egg on its face back in 2008 when KOMU did a 14-part series on autism and the potential connection to that and vaccinations. It was done by a student. We allowed the student to do it. She was really interested in the story, but she got caught up in the hype from people like Jenny McCarthy. She went to some event where she spoke, and all these family members that for whatever reason are worried about vaccines causing problems with their kids, she got caught up in it, and we allowed it to happen and even bragged about it for a time online. So there's plenty of local and national and J-school culpability in some of these kinds of stories.
And to me, I think the one of the big problems here is that the story in and of itself was about what was happening to these children who had went to Disneyland and contracted a very dangerous, disease, a virus, and what was not taking place in terms of their getting vaccination and people making sure that these things were going on. And now that story in and of itself has been lost because we're still talking about, whether or not someone should be vaccinated and whether or not it's connected to autism or some other kind of mental disease. I mean, that initial story has gotten lost, and that was a public health risk there.
And as dangerous as the situation is, you'd think it'd be awfully hard for the media to sensationalize a story like this, but not true. I was watching the Daily Show with Jon Stewart last night, and he was making fun of CNN. One of their correspondents is sitting on the set of a fake plane, and you see this little animated cloud of measles viruses blowing up and enveloping him as he's talking. We can find a way to blow these things out of proportion.
We talked in jest and joked last week about how we could every week do a segment on what dumb thing did Don Lemon do this week. There was even one specific, if you want to know more about it, there's a link on the blog. We're not going to get into it, but even one regarding a selfie this week where CNN, again, kind of got into it in a way where they're just opening the door for Jon Stewart to do stuff like that. Here's one that might make you stop and go, huh? President Obama told House Democrats that if they wanted to be informed on trade issues, not to read the Huffington Post. It's a bit of an eye raiser for some, given that he said this at about the same time the left-leaning aggregator published his post on a blueprint for middle-class economics. What is it exactly that the president took issue with?
I think the president is taking an issue with the Huffington Post because he feels as if they're not giving him his just reward for things that he's doing, and they're sort of attacking him on one thing and then giving him credit on the other. And it's this sort of back and forth thing. He's had this sort of love-hate relationship with them ever since he got into office, and I think this is more on the I don't like you side again, and within 2 or 3 weeks we'll be back on, okay, I like the Huffington Post. I mean, I think that's where this story is headed.
I think when you build up partisan media, they can bite the hand that feeds them. I mean, here we have the president trying to look like he's reasonable and compromising with Republicans on something that could be good for the economy. And here has one of his most partisan and reliable, I would say, news organs out there is biting him on this issue because their audience doesn't line up with the president on this particular issue.
And you have to remember, I mean, he's in lame duck mode right now. So everyone's starting to pivot to 2016. Even the media is starting to pivot to 2016. So and for him to be able to still get media attention, he's going to have to do certain things that he necessarily didn't have to do for the last 6 years.
Okay, well, I don't know if you've seen this week's copy of Newsweek yet, but the cover story about sexism in Silicon Valley has a lot of people talking because of the image that's on the cover. It shows a drawing of a woman, thin, wearing red high heels and a short red dress, with a computer cursor lifting the bottom of her skirt. The illustrator who designed the cover, who's a man, told the Huffington Post that it was his intention to depict the harassment that women suffer, and that he thinks the drawing does exactly that. What do you think?
Okay, first of all, take it with a grain of salt when a man is talking about sexism, but I will say I tended to side with the artist. I mean, he basically is, and this cover story is all about sexism in Silicon Valley, how entrenched it is, how demeaning it is, the impact it's having on the lives of women and also on our ability to, think creatively. The story is extremely well done from my point of view, and that cover really says it all. Here's a cursor looking up the skirt of a young woman carrying a laptop. Okay, I can see how some women might say that this is sexism in service of exposing sexism. But when the guy was asked about it, he was criticized in a lot of places, including some folks on the Today Show, apparently. He said, they're just not serious. He says one moment they're outraged about this supposed sexist image, and the next segment is about 50 Shades of Grey, followed by a hot new swimsuit segment. So come on.
I think you're absolutely right. I think part of this is that when you start talking about sexism, you can find it anywhere. And I think what he was trying to do, and maybe what Newsweek was trying to do, is to get eyeballs into that article, which I agree with Mike.
Which is the
very
purpose
well
of
done.
every magazine cover.
Exactly.
I mean, it's meant to sell issues of the magazine.
I mean, we have talked before about Newsweek and its covers, and sometimes they will distort reality, sell a magazine. You think of that famous or infamous mom breastfeeding her 4-year-old. Well, that's not really what the story was all about, or the Muslim rage cover, But in this instance, I think the artist managed to capture the reality of that story better than a photograph or a video or some other kind of medium might have done.
I mean, think about it. What I'm very interested in, and you can find this if you go on the Links blog, is that now you have this sort of discourse going on among those who are within Silicon Valley and what's going on about the level of sexism and whether or not what some of the things in the article are true or not true. And you have some women coming back in saying, wait a minute, it's not as bad as this article makes it out to be. So now you've got these conversations going on, and I think that's when you can really start talking about the issue, and maybe that'll lead to some substantive change in what's going on out there. That, to me, is the story more so than its cover.
And that's what good journalism does, is it sparks conversations and brings on change. Well, from one image of a woman to another, WSPA, a CBS affiliate in Spartanville, South Carolina, wants its staffers to really be able to picture, to imagine its typical viewer. So much so that it's printed out a life-size cardboard cutout of her. Meet Michelle. She's between 25 and 54 years old. She has children. She worries about those children's safety. She's on the lookout for product recalls that have an impact on her family, and she's wanting to find ways to save money. And WSPA wants her watching their newscasts. On the face of it, it seems like a perfectly normal thing to do, to have kind of a character in mind that you're writing your newscast to, your target audience.
Well, and in fact, if you look at some of the coverage of this, you'd think that this is just a few crazy television stations and consultants out there doing this kind of thing. This is what is done in advertising and marketing circles and in startups and research. It's called creating a customer persona.
We have Mabel from Moberly here in our classes.
Yeah.
I mean, so so it's being done in a lot of other places. NPR does it. We were in a conversation about a competition our students are involved in, and it's clear they do this kind of thing. Does it work? I don't know. I mean, the evidence seems to be kind of anecdotal, but, you know, the only problem I really have with it is the fact that this station, the one station you talked about, they created one persona. And I feel sorry for any news outlet, TV station or otherwise, that thinks they only have to cater to one demographic slice or one persona these days. You've got to use all of your media to go after as many different targeted audiences as you can get.
And I think that part of the problem here is the consultants. I mean, you have consultants come in and they tell you this is what you need to be going after, but have they really done their homework to really focus in on what is the community that you're serving? And that's the problem that I have with this, is because you're serving one segment of that community, and in South Carolina, there it is very complex.
Whole lot more than what you see in that cutout. And that's one of the things that worries me, is because that image is what then drives your news coverage, and you aren't necessarily serving your full audience in that way.
Now, I agree with that completely, but I will say this much. There is something to be said with using audience research properly to try to give your audience more of the things that helps them, that they're interested in. And one good way to take that research out of the realm of, you know, charts and graphs and make it real for news organizations is to have a persona of some sort. I don't even mind the cutout. I just mind that they've oversimplified it to one specific target.
And maybe you need to have more than one cutout.
Yeah.
You need to think about your community as a whole. You have 5 or 6 cutouts spread out all over the newsroom and say,
in which case I have no problem with it. It's when you do have something more representative.
This story is going to reach these people and not necessarily these.
Well, if that mom was watching the Super Bowl Sunday night, some of those commercials might have only validated some of the fears she has for her family, like this one from Nationwide Insurance, which killed off a kid.
Hey, wait! Gus, wait! Wait!
I'll never learn to ride a bike. Or get cooties. I'll never learn to fly. Or travel the world with my best friend. And I won't ever get married. I couldn't grow up because I died from an accident.
The insurance company stands by the ad, which it says is designed to show how often accidents can be prevented, and that the company has tools in place to help families learn how to prevent them. But there were several other ads that could also only be described as downers. There was the Nissan ad with the Harry Chapin classic Cats in the Cradle, a public service announcement that featured a woman who was calling 911 to order a pizza, something that was kind of confusing until halfway through when we realized that was the only way she could safely call for help because her attacker was listening in. Usually Super Bowl ads tend to be funny. They tend to be nostalgic. They tend to bring up good feelings for people. That was something we didn't really see this year.
Yeah, this was the year of, I would say, issues commercials in the Super Bowl. I mean, we saw the Nationwide one here, and the one about the domestic violence. I thought it was very well done, but I think maybe the setting of playing it during the Super Bowl was probably not the best place to put that, because that's not the audience that you're gonna be sort of going after, or at least not the mode in which the audience is in at the time.
Although one could argue maybe this was the year that it needed to happen, given all of the NFL's problems with domestic violence and other issues
I was thinking the same thing, but you also open yourself up to people not really recognizing what the point is that you're trying to get
when they're at parties, frankly.
Parties, yeah.
You know, and all this talk about it being a buzzkill, I don't really care. I mean, the whole point of an ad on the Super Bowl is to raise awareness for your brand or an issue or whatever it might be. And I'll have to say that if you're talking about trying to raise awareness about dangers in the household and making sure your kids, don't fall into that situation, it was a pretty good ad. I mean, I'd rather see Nationwide running that spot than the 10,000th time they've run, Peyton Manning humming the Nationwide jingle and talking about
would agree with you on that
his sandwich or whatever,
That's the one I expected when I saw Nationwide, was one of those, and we didn't get that. And this one really surprised me because it is really talking about an issue that we just got through talking about news coverage and this mom, that safety thing. That's exactly what that ad was talking about, is that safety thing that all parents really worry about.
If you want to talk about an ad that I personally didn't like, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, I kind of hated the McDonald's Pay with Love ad,
Yeah,
Call
people
your
I was watching with
mom and
didn't
all
get
that.
it.
Yeah.
Well, it just seemed so patently obvious what McDonald's was trying to do there, and I didn't. And the other one I really didn't like was it called Jublia, the toe fungus?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I think I missed
I
that
didn't
one.
really need to see that one either.
Yeah. But I do think Budweiser hit it out of the park again. That was a really good ad with the puppy and the dog. That was good.
Did you guys catch the GoDaddy ad, which just kind of showed a guy sitting at a computer with a whole bunch of just screens,
Yeah,
very clearly done at the drop of a hat to replace
Right.
that Puppy Mills ad we talked a little bit about last week.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you my favorite one that nobody seemed to talk very much about, or at least I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and that was for Squarespace. They're one of the many companies that helps you to create websites.
I did see that.
The Jeff Bridges sleeping tapes. Here he's chanting while these people are lying in bed. It turns out, as they point you to the website,
We went straight to the website. The people that I was watching with, we went straight to the website.
It's real, and there's a charity that's going to benefit from selling this crazy album of Jeff Bridges talking over weird sounds. So, hey, good for them.
And who doesn't want lullabies from
Jeff Bridges?
There are a couple of stories that we have talked about in this program in the last couple of weeks that I want to go ahead and update for you. The first, Peter Greste, the Al Jazeera English reporter jailed in Egypt, is now free and back home with his family in Australia. His release happened pretty quickly. Hear him describe it in this Al Jazeera interview.
And then I went for a run, and the prison warden called me over and told me that, it's time to pack your stuff. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're going? I said, well, where? To another prison. He said, no, the embassy's coming. They'll be here in an hour. Get your stuff and go. And I can't tell you that real mix of emotions that was boiling inside. As I said to you a moment ago, sense of relief and excitement, but also real stress at having to say goodbye to my colleagues and friends, the people who've really become family inside that prison. You spend 400 days in such close proximity with people, and you really get to know them very, very well. So it was a very difficult moment walking out of that prison, saying goodbye to those guys, not knowing how much longer they will have to put up with this.
Definitely a juxtaposition from a few months ago when we were watching the video of his parents during the sentencing. How did this come about? It was one of those things Sunday morning we all just kind of woke up and he was freed.
Well, it kind of seems like the Egyptian government got its mileage out of this case. I mean, first of all, they put the fear of God in reporters working in country of saying anything about President al-Sisi and what's going on there. They also got Al Jazeera to shut down its Egyptian channel, part of a larger thing to get the government of Qatar and the government of Egypt on the same page. So they got what they wanted, and so now let's get rid of the distractions. We'll deport him so nobody can complain about it. Maybe the other guy who has the joint Canadian and Egyptian citizenship will get to go home, get to go to Canada. But I feel for the other journalist, the third one, who is an Egyptian citizen, pure and simple. What's going to happen to him?
Well, I think he's probably going to be in jail for a long period of time. I think it also sort of helps in the relationship between Egypt and Australia. And I think the Egyptians need as many allies as they can get right now because they're on shaky ground. I mean, the Middle East is pretty toxic right now, especially with what happened yesterday in terms of ISIS literally setting the Jordanian pilot ablaze while he was still alive. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where you've got a lot of these Arab states looking at each other and going like, okay, who's our friend and who's our foe? And I think Egypt's in the middle of that right now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, last Wednesday we told you about Indiana Governor Mike Pence's plan for a new state-run news website. It was going to be called Just In. Well, by Thursday, he pulled the plug. The idea was for the site to break news about the state's executive branch and then share those stories with state and local media. As you can imagine, it was heavily criticized by politicians in the other branches of Indiana government and outside of the state of Indiana, and journalists alike, including the three of us here on this program last week. Well, before we go today, I want to follow up on one last story, and I'm going to ask you, Ernest, to forgive me. I can already imagine the look you're going to give me when I bring this up. I want you to all rewind to our October 28th program when we told you about the new truTV reality show, Breaking Greenville. Remember this trailer?
Stand by, we got about 15 seconds.
5, 4, 3, 2, opener.
Welcome back to Good Morning Mississippi. We have breaking news this morning. What happened?
It looks like we're having technical difficulties.
Well, that didn't go very well.
I watched it. Mike, you watched it.
I watched it.
Did you?
I watched
you
it.
watched it?
I watched it.
Oh, good.
I watched
Thank you,
it.
Ernest. It makes me feel better. Train wreck, wasn't it?
Train wreck.
Oh, not only was it a train wreck, it was a great train wreck. I mean, I've got it set on my DVR.
So do I.
I'm going to be watching every single episode.
I'm not going
that far. But there were some parts of it. So first of all, for folks who don't remember, right, the setup is that we have these two small market television stations in Greenville, Mississippi,
competing with one another,
and then the characters that work in this station. You know, I mean, I don't know how they found them, why they decided to do this, but they have two youngish blonde anchors who maybe are not the most experienced journalists in the world, shall we say. They have a news director who calls herself the Oprah of the South. We have another news director who apparently, when he's called out for claiming on air that their reporters got to the scene of a story before the other station, and then she said, no, that wasn't true. The guy, well, I don't really know if it was true or not, so what? We said it on the air anyway. You got these weather guys who are kind of sketchy weather guys.
Steve Schill, one of the stations, used to be in Chicago, where I had come from. Interestingly enough, and we should tell our audience that this Greenville market it ranks at about 190 or so out of 215 television markets. To give you a sense of where we are here in mid-Missouri, we're at about the mid-140s. So these are stations that are a good 40 markets smaller than what we're looking at in terms of size and of reach.
Let's just say it is a new kind of reality television where you're actually looking at journalists in a way that I don't necessarily think we want to be looked at.
Oh no, they're clowns, and they make people in our industry look.
Yeah. But strangely enough, there are actually real interesting journalism issues that come up as a result of watching. For example, we have the anchor who's out in the field talking to a farmer, getting a little bit too chubby with the farmer, doing a high five. How close do you get to your sources?
And whether or not the high five should actually be on the air.
The news director then coaching her on why that high five probably wasn't the best idea.
And we also had a situation where the other anchor who's competing with her, decides to weigh herself live on the air as part of a series she's doing about healthy eating, which at first seems, that's for a small market television news operation, maybe that's a pretty good kind of sweep story. Except,
until sponsored by Subway.
Sponsored by Subway sandwiches. Yeah. So there's a lot of meat there, for us to talk about, as well as having fun with it.
Yeah, I just sat there and watched it, and I was thinking about the two of you,
and I was going
like, I can't believe we're actually going to be talking about this again on Views of the News, but
we're going to be done after this. I promise.
I don't know.
Mike.
I don't promise that.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. That music means we're pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about today on our links blog under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. Our thanks to our technical team, Travis McMillan, Pat Akers, and Maya Jackson, and to our associate producer, Hannah Smith. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.